The rain hammered against the rocky cliff face as Maya clutched her swollen belly, her hiking boots slipping on the muddy ledge. 8 months pregnant and completely lost in the wilderness, she had one choice: climb down into the hidden valley below or face certain death on the mountain. What she discovered in that impossible place defied everything she knew about the world. Children with ancient eyes playing in dusty streets, adults who whispered in languages that predated civilization, and photographs on every mantle showing the exact same faces, spanning decades, unchanged by time. But the real shock came when the village elder handed her a faded newspaper clipping from 1962, featuring her own face, her own name, standing in this very village. Maya had never been here before. She was born in 1995, yet somehow, impossibly, she belonged to this place. As the villagers gathered around her with knowing smiles, Maya realized the terrible truth. Some secrets are written in blood, and some prisons are built from love. But how could she have lived here before she was even born? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The newspaper clipping trembled in Maya's hands, the yellowed edges crumbling between her fingers. Her own face stared back at her from the grainy black and white photograph, but it wasn't possible. The woman in the picture looked exactly like her. Same dark eyes, same curve of the lips, same small scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Even the way she stood, one hand resting protectively on her rounded stomach, was unmistakably Maya's posture. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the valley. The village elder, a woman whose age seemed to shift like shadows depending on the light, smiled with lips that had spoken secrets for far too long. "Names have power here, child. Faces have memory. You carry both." Maya's knees buckled, and strong hands caught her before she could fall. The villagers moved with practiced ease, as if they had been expecting this moment. A chair appeared beneath her, worn wooden arms smooth from decades of use. Someone pressed a cup of warm tea into her shaking hands, the ceramic radiating heat that seemed to seep into her very bones. "I don't understand," Maya said, looking around at the faces surrounding her. Now that she was closer, she could see what her shock had initially missed. The children weren't quite right. A boy who couldn't have been more than 10 had eyes that held the weight of centuries. A girl with pigtails spoke in hushed tones to her mother, using words that sounded like ancient Latin mixed with something far older. "Understanding comes in layers," the elder said, settling into a chair across from Maya. "Like the sediment of this valley, built up over millennia. You are seeing only the surface." The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs and she winced. The movement seemed to ripple through the gathered crowd, heads turning toward her belly with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Several of the children stepped closer, their two old eyes fixed on the spot where her child rested. "What do you want with my baby?" Maya asked, instinctively wrapping both arms around her stomach. "Want?" The elder's laugh was like dry leaves rustling. "Oh, child, it's not what we want. It's what the valley requires." A man emerged from one of the stone houses that lined the narrow street. Maya's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed familiar, too familiar. She had seen that face before, but not in person, in dreams, in half-remembered moments between sleep and waking. "Hello, Maya," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of recognition. "I've been waiting for you to come home." "Home?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. "I don't have a home. I've never had a home." "Memory is a funny thing," he said, kneeling beside her chair. Up close, she could see that his hands were calloused from work, but there was something timeless about them, as if they had been performing the same tasks for decades without aging. Sometimes it skips like a stone across water, touching down only briefly before moving on. But the water remembers every touch. The rain had stopped, Maya realized. The clouds that had been threatening to crush the valley with their weight were dispersing, revealing patches of sky that seemed too blue, too perfect. The village itself appeared to shimmer in the new light, as if it existed slightly out of phase with the rest of the world. "I need to leave," Maya said, struggling to stand. "I need to get back to civilization, to a hospital. The baby will be safe here," the elder interrupted. "Safer than anywhere else in the world. Time moves differently in our valley. Children grow at their own pace. Some never grow at all." The words sent ice through Maya's veins. She looked again at the children playing in the dusty streets, really looked this time. Their clothes were from different eras. Some wore simple tunics that could have been from any century. Others sported dresses that screamed 1940s, and still others wore jeans and t-shirts that looked contemporary but somehow felt wrong. "How long have they been here?" Maya whispered. The elder's smile was both beautiful and terrible. "How long is forever, child?" The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old, yet something in her eyes suggested centuries of accumulated knowledge. She stood at the edge of the village square, wearing a faded blue dress that seemed to belong to another era, her dark hair braided with ribbons that had long since lost their color. "You shouldn't have come here," the girl said, her voice carrying an odd formality, "especially not in your condition." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. The baby had been unusually quiet since she'd entered the village, and now she realized the silence felt wrong. No kicks, no movement at all. Panic fluttered in her chest. "I just need to rest," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My car broke down on the mountain road. Is there somewhere I can call for help?" The child tilted her head, studying Maya with unsettling intensity. "There are no phones here, no roads that lead away." She paused, then added with what might have been sympathy, "I'm sorry, I truly am." Before Maya could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed across the cobblestones. A woman emerged from one of the stone houses, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. She had silver hair twisted into an elegant bun and wore a black dress that rustled as she walked. What struck Maya most was how the woman's eyes matched the child's, ancient, knowing, tired. "Elena," the woman said sharply to the girl. "What did we discuss about speaking to newcomers?" The child, Elena, dropped her gaze. "I was only trying to help, Mother Vera." "Help?" The woman's laugh held no warmth. "There is no help for her now. She's here, isn't she? The choice has been made." Her eyes fixed on Maya. "Though I admit, we weren't expecting someone in your particular situation. It's been so long since we've had a pregnancy in Millhaven." "I don't understand," Maya said, though a growing dread suggested that perhaps, on some level, she did. "I just need to get to a hospital. My baby—" "Your baby is fine," Mother Vera interrupted. "More than fine. Special, even. I can sense it from here." She took a step closer, and Maya caught a scent that reminded her of old books and dried flowers. "Tell me, dear, do you dream of this place? Have you seen our village before tonight?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. She had been dreaming of stone houses and narrow streets for weeks, dreams so vivid she'd wake with the taste of mountain air in her mouth. She'd attributed them to pregnancy hormones, stress from David's sudden departure, the general upheaval of her life. "How did you—" Maya began, then stopped. The woman's smile revealed teeth too white and too sharp for someone her age. "You felt the call," Mother Vera said gently. "They all do, eventually. The bloodline runs deep even when diluted by generations of absence. Your great-grandmother understood before she ran. Coward that she was." Maya's legs felt weak. Her great-grandmother had died when Maya was 12, but not before telling strange stories about a place where time stood still, where children never grew old, where terrible prices were paid for impossible gifts. Maya's mother had dismissed them as the ramblings of dementia, but now— "That's impossible," Maya whispered. "Is it?" Elena spoke up, ignoring Mother Vera's sharp look. "How old do you think I am?" Looking at the child's face in the lamplight, Maya saw what she had missed before, tiny lines around the eyes, a weariness in her expression that no 7-year-old should possess. the careful way she held herself, as if her small body contained too much knowledge. "Elena is 43, Mother Vera said matter-of-factly. "She came to us the same way you have, following the call, seeking something she couldn't name. She chose to stay." "Chose?" Maya's voice cracked. "Oh yes," Mother Vera smiled again. "We always give newcomers a choice. Elena chose eternal youth, eternal beauty. The children always do. The adults usually choose to forget they ever found us and wake up in their cars on the highway below, convinced they had a vivid dream." Hope bloomed in Maya's chest. "Then I can leave. I can choose to forget." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena looked at the ground, and Mother Vera's expression grew almost pitying. "I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore, dear one. You see, the choice was yours to make before you carried one of ours." Her gaze dropped to Maya's belly. "But now? Now you're bound here until that child is born, and after—" She shrugged elegantly. "Well, we'll see what you choose then." The baby suddenly kicked hard against Maya's ribs, as if responding to the conversation. But instead of relief, Maya felt only terror. Because in that moment of movement, she could have sworn she felt something else stirring in her womb. Something that felt far too aware, too knowing, for a child not yet born. The cottage they assigned her sat at the village's edge, its windows facing the endless forest rather than the cliff. Maya noticed this deliberate positioning as Mrs. Holloway led her up the worn stone path, chattering about the village's history with practiced ease. "Built in 1847, the older woman explained, her voice carrying that same unsettling warmth. "The founders sought isolation, you see, a place where families could raise their children away from the corruption of the outside world." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly as they approached the front door. The cottage looked quaint enough. Whitewashed walls, climbing roses, a red door that had seen better decades. But something felt wrong about the proportions, as if it had been built for people smaller than herself. "The previous tenant left quite suddenly," Mrs. Holloway continued, producing an old brass key, "but she kept it in lovely condition. I think you'll find everything you need." The interior confirmed Maya's suspicions. The door frames hung lower than standard, the countertops sat several inches below normal height, and the furniture seemed scaled for someone significantly shorter. Even the light switches had been positioned too low on the walls. "Was the previous tenant a child?" Maya asked, unable to keep the question contained. Mrs. Holloway paused, her hand frozen on a cabinet door. "Children grow up, dear, though some take longer than others." She turned with that practiced smile. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner is at 6 sharp in the village hall. Everyone attends." Alone, Maya explored her new prison because that's what this was, she realized with growing certainty. The windows, while appearing normal from outside, were reinforced with wire mesh sandwiched between the glass panes. The doors, though they opened freely now, showed evidence of external locks that had been recently removed. Scratches around the door frame suggested they'd been hastily taken off just before her arrival. She found more unsettling details as the afternoon wore on. Children's drawings covered the bedroom walls, but they depicted scenes no child should know, detailed anatomical sketches, maps of human nervous systems, and disturbing imagery that seemed to focus obsessively on pregnancy and birth. The artwork showed a sophisticated understanding of biology that belonged in medical textbooks, not a child's room. In the bedroom closet, she discovered clothes in various sizes, as if the previous occupant had lived here for years while growing from child to adult. The progression was methodical: size 8 children's clothes, then 10, 12, 14, and finally adult sizes, all hanging in careful order. But the adult clothes at the end showed signs of being altered, taken in rather than let out, as if the wearer had begun shrinking back down. Maya's pregnancy felt heavier suddenly, her unborn child more active. She pressed her hands against her belly, feeling strong kicks that seemed almost frantic, as if the baby sensed danger. A soft knock interrupted her growing panic. She opened the door to find the boy from earlier, Thomas, Mrs. Holloway had called him. Up close, his childish features became even more disturbing. His eyes held decades of knowledge, and when he smiled, she noticed his teeth were too perfect, too white, like expensive dental work. "I brought you tea," he said, holding up a delicate china cup. "Mrs. Holloway thought you might need it before dinner." "That's very kind." Maya accepted the cup but didn't drink, noting how the boy's small hands showed the calluses and weathering of manual labor. "How long have you lived here, Thomas?" "Oh, a very long time. Since I was small." His laugh carried an adult's bitter amusement. "I've been 8 years old for longer than I care to remember." The casual admission hung between them like a physical presence. Maya set down the untouched tea, her hands trembling. "You mustn't be frightened," Thomas continued, his voice gentle but somehow threatening. "The process is quite natural once you understand it. The village needs what you carry, and in return we offer eternal childhood. No death, no aging, no painful goodbyes. My baby will be treasured beyond measure." Thomas stepped closer, and Maya caught a scent of something medicinal clinging to his clothes. "The essence of new life, freely given, sustains us all. Your child will become part of something beautiful and eternal." Maya backed against the doorframe, her mind reeling. "You're insane, all of you." Insanity is believing that linear time and inevitable death represent the natural order. Thomas's adult vocabulary emerging from his child's mouth created a horrifying disconnect. "We've transcended those limitations. Soon you'll understand the gift we're offering." He turned to leave, then paused. "Do drink your tea, Maya. The herbs will help with your circulation, and we need you healthy for the ceremony." His smile revealed those perfect teeth again. 3 more weeks until the new moon. Everything must be perfect by then. As his footsteps faded down the path, Maya realized the true horror of her situation. These weren't just strange people. They were predators who had found a way to steal life itself, and her unborn child was their next target. The morning light filtering through the cottage windows felt wrong somehow, too pale and distant, as if it traveled through layers of something Maya couldn't name. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over yesterday's encounters and the inexplicable familiarity that seemed to cling to everything in this place. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Maya, are you awake?" Eleanor's voice carried that same musical quality from yesterday, but in the thin morning air, it sounded almost hollow. Maya opened the door to find the woman holding a steaming mug and wearing an expression of practiced concern. "I brought you some tea, a special blend we make here. It's good for expectant mothers." The earthy, herbal scent that rose from the cup triggered something deep in Maya's memory, a flash of being very small and sick, someone's gentle hands holding a similar cup to her lips. The image vanished before she could grasp it fully. "Thank you," Maya said, accepting the mug. The warmth felt real enough, grounding her in the present moment. "I was wondering about getting back to the main road. My phone still has no signal, and I really should contact my doctor about missing my appointment." Eleanor's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible right now. The bridge washed out in last night's storm. Happens sometimes during the rainy season. But don't worry, Thomas is working on temporary repairs. Should have you on your way soon enough." Maya hadn't heard any storm. She'd been awake most of the night, and while the wind had whispered through the trees, there had been nothing resembling the kind of weather that could destroy a bridge. "How long do these repairs usually take?" "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. These old mountain storms can be quite destructive." Eleanor gestured toward the window. "But you're safe here. We'll take good care of you and the baby." The casual possessiveness in that last statement made Maya's skin crawl. She forced herself to sip the tea, noting its bitter undertone beneath the aromatic herbs. "I'd like to see the bridge myself, if that's all right, just to assess the situation." "Of course, dear. After breakfast. I'll have one of the children show you around. They know all the best paths." Eleanor paused, tilting her head slightly. "You know, you remind me of someone. There was a girl who came through here many years ago. Before my time, really, but the older residents still speak of her. Such a tragic story. Maya's pulse quickened. What kind of tragic story? Oh, I shouldn't gossip. Just that she arrived pregnant, like you, and alone. The poor thing was so frightened, running from something. We tried to help her, but... Eleanor shrugged delicately. Some people aren't meant for peace, I suppose. They carry their chaos wherever they go. What happened to her? Eleanor's eyes seemed to grow distant. She left, eventually. Had to, really. But she left something precious behind. Her gaze flickered meaningfully to Maya's stomach. Children belong in safe places, don't you think? Before Maya could respond, Eleanor had glided away, leaving her standing in the doorway with questions multiplying like shadows. The tea felt heavy in her hands now, its bitter aftertaste coating her tongue. Maya dressed quickly and stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. The village looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, as if the buildings had drawn closer together while she slept. She counted the cottages she could see, 12, arranged in a rough circle around the central square, where an old stone fountain stood dry and cracked. The children were already playing, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. But as Maya watched them, that wrongness she'd sensed yesterday crystallized into something more concrete. They moved like children, running, jumping, calling to each other, but their games had an odd, rehearsed quality, as if they were performing childhood rather than living it. One of them, the dark-haired boy who'd stared at her yesterday, broke away from the group and approached. Up close, his eyes held an intelligence that seemed far too old for his apparent age. "Eleanor says I'm to show you the bridge," he said in a voice that was carefully modulated, almost formal. "I'm Peter." "Thank you, Peter. I'm Maya." She studied his face, searching for some clue to the mystery she felt surrounding her. "How long have you lived here?" Peter's head tilted in that same gesture Eleanor had made. "Long enough. Shall we go? The path can be tricky for someone in your condition." As they walked toward the village edge, Maya noticed how the other children watched their progress with identical expressions of mild interest. Not one of them looked surprised or curious about the stranger in their midst. It was as if her presence had been expected, planned for. The trees grew denser as they followed a narrow trail, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led deeper into something she might not be able to escape. The narrow stone steps descended into darkness, each footfall echoing off damp walls that seemed to press closer with every breath. Elena's flashlight beam danced across ancient symbols carved into the rock, spirals and interlocking circles that made her eyes water when she stared too long. The air grew thicker, carrying the metallic taste of old blood and something else she couldn't identify. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mounting dread. She paused, one hand pressed against her belly, the other gripping the cold stone wall for support. The whispers she'd heard in the village square had grown silent, but their memory clung to her like cobwebs. 23 steps down, the passage opened into a circular chamber lit by torches that burned without smoke. The flames cast writhing shadows on walls covered in more of those disturbing symbols. But it was the altar in the center that made her blood freeze, a smooth black stone, stained with dark patches that could only be dried blood. Around the altar's base, dozens of small handprints were pressed into the stone, as if children had reached up from below. Each print was perfect, unmarked by time, and Elena realized with growing horror that she recognized some of them. The delicate fingers of the girl who'd served her tea, the broader palm of the boy who'd watched her from the bakery window. A soft sound made her spin around. Thomas stood at the bottom of the steps, his ageless face grave in the torchlight. Gone was any pretense of childhood innocence. His eyes held centuries of terrible knowledge. "You weren't supposed to find this place yet," he said, his voice carrying an authority that belonged to someone far older than his appearance suggested. "Mother Vera wanted more time to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Elena's voice cracked. The flashlight trembled in her grip. Thomas stepped closer, and she noticed for the first time how wrong he looked, like a photograph that had been retouched too many times, all the natural imperfections smoothed away until only an uncanny approximation of humanity remained. For the truth about why you're here, about what you really are, his gaze dropped to her swollen belly, about what your child will become. The temperature in the chamber seemed to plummet. Elena's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. "I'm leaving. Right now." No, the word wasn't threatening, just matter of fact. "You can't. None of us can. The village chose you, Elena, just like it chose all of us. We're bound to this place by something far older than choice." She backed toward the steps, but found her way blocked by two more figures emerging from shadows she hadn't noticed. The elderly man from the inn and the woman who'd sold her fruit. Neither looked elderly anymore. Their faces held the same terrible perfection as Thomas's, the same ageless emptiness. "The memories will come back soon," the woman said softly. "They always do, once someone finds the sanctum. You'll remember who you were before, why you came here the first time." "The first time?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas nodded. 70 years ago. You were pregnant then too, with me. You tried to run when you learned what this place demanded, but the village brought you back. It always brings us back." The chamber spun around her. Impossible. She was 28 years old, had lived her entire life in the city, had documentation going back to her birth. But even as she formed these protests, images flickered at the edges of her consciousness, a younger version of herself standing in this same chamber, screaming as Thomas was taken from her arms, still an infant. "The ritual requires willing participants," the elderly man explained, though his voice now carried the timbre of someone much younger. "Children who choose to never grow old, never die, never leave. But choice requires understanding, and understanding requires age. So we wait until they're old enough to comprehend the bargain. Then we give them the choice their parents made for them." Elena's knees buckled. She caught herself against the altar, her palm landing directly on one of the small handprints. The moment her skin touched the stone, memories exploded through her mind like shrapnel. She saw herself as a young woman, desperate and alone, stumbling into this village while fleeing an abusive husband. She remembered the kindness of the residents, their offer of sanctuary, their gentle insistence that her unborn child would be safe here forever. She recalled signing something, not with ink, but with blood drawn from a small cut on her finger, and she remembered the horror when she finally understood what forever meant. The memories kept coming, her attempts to escape, always finding herself back at the village entrance as if she'd never left, watching Thomas grow from infant to child, but never beyond. The slow realization that she, too, had stopped aging the moment she'd accepted their bargain. Elena looked up at Thomas, her son, frozen in eternal childhood, and saw her own eyes staring back at her. Sarah's hands trembled as she pushed through the weathered wooden door of what appeared to be the village's oldest building. The structure leaned precariously against the cliff face, its stones blackened with age and something else she didn't want to identify. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of ancient parchment and decay. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent energy. This wasn't just a library, it was a repository of secrets, and she could feel them pressing against her consciousness, like whispers in a language she almost remembered. "You shouldn't be here." The voice belonged to one of the children, though Sarah couldn't tell which one. They all looked the same in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, ageless faces with eyes that held too much knowledge. This one stepped from the shadows between the shelves, and Sarah recognized the boy who had been watching her cottage. "Thomas told you not to wander." The child's voice carried an authority that chilled her. "The records aren't meant for newcomers." "What records?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the danger that permeated this place. The child smiled, and Sarah saw that his teeth were perfectly white, too perfect for someone who should have lived through decades of primitive village life. Birth records, death records, the comings and goings of our little community. Would you like to see? Before she could answer, he pulled a massive tome from the shelf, its leather binding cracked and stained. The book fell open in his small hands, revealing pages covered in cramped handwriting that seemed to shift and writhe in the uncertain light. Sarah found herself drawn forward despite every instinct screaming at her to run. The entries were organized by date, stretching back decades, then centuries, names, ages, circumstances of arrival. But it was the pattern that made her blood run cold. Every few years, a pregnant woman would arrive, always alone, always lost, always desperate for shelter. And then, months later, a single entry would mark the birth of a child, followed by the mother's death shortly after. "Natural causes," the boy said, reading over her shoulder, "complications from childbirth, fever, accidents." His finger traced the entries, and Sarah noticed his skin was ice cold where it brushed against her arm. But the children, they always survived. They always thrived. Sarah's eyes scanned the names, looking for something, anything that might explain the growing certainty that she belonged here in ways she couldn't understand. Then she saw it, an entry from 32 years ago that made her heart stop. Eleanor Whitmore, age 19, with child. Arrived October 15th. The handwriting continued in the same careful script. Child born December 3rd. Daughter. Mother deceased December 5th. Child given name, Sarah. The book slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking bones. The child, Thomas, she realized now, though he looked no different from when he must have written her birth entry 3 decades ago, watched her with ancient eyes. "You remember now, don't you?" he said softly. "Not everything, but enough. The dreams that aren't dreams, the feeling that you've walked these streets before, the way the cottage key felt familiar in your hand." Sarah's mind reeled. Fragments of memory surfaced like debris from a shipwreck, playing in the village square under an endless twilight sky, learning to read from these very books, growing up among children who never grew, adults who never aged. And then, leaving. Somehow, impossibly leaving. How? The word tore from her throat. How did I get out? Thomas's expression darkened. "You weren't supposed to. None of us understood how you managed it. One day you were here, part of our family, and then you were gone. Disappeared like morning mist. We searched everywhere." His voice carried a note of hurt that seemed genuine. "We thought you were lost forever, but I grew up. I aged. I had a life out there." "Did you?" Thomas interrupted. "Think carefully, Sarah. What do you actually remember about your life before coming here? Not the stories you tell yourself, but real memories, faces, places, people who mattered." The question hit her like a physical blow. She tried to grasp at memories of her childhood, her adolescence, the father of her child, but they slipped away like smoke. Everything before finding this village was a grey haze, punctuated by occasional flashes that felt more like dreams than reality. "The pregnancy brought you back," Thomas continued. "Children call to children, even across impossible distances. Your baby wants to come home, Sarah, and now that you're here, now that you remember," his smile was gentle and terrible, "you can never leave again. None of us can." The baby kicked hard, and Sarah gasped, doubling over. For a moment she could have sworn she felt small hands pressing against her belly from the inside, eager to join the eternal childhood that awaited beyond her womb. The council chamber felt smaller with every breath Sarah took. Ancient stone walls seemed to press inward, and the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows that made the assembled faces appear even more grotesque. Elder Matthias sat at the head of a crescent-shaped table, his pale hands folded with deliberate calm. The other council members flanked him, their ageless faces betraying nothing of their centuries-old burden. "You've been asking questions," Matthias said, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated years, "disturbing the peace we've worked so hard to maintain." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, feeling the subtle movement within. "I have a right to know what this place is, what you people are." A woman to Matthias's left, introduced as Elder Catherine, leaned forward. Her skin had the translucent quality of old parchment, though her features remained those of someone barely 30. Rights are luxuries we abandoned long ago, dear. Here there is only necessity. The children, Sarah pressed, ignoring the chill that ran down her spine. They're not children at all, are they? Some of them have been here for decades. The council exchanged glances that spoke of shared secrets and collective guilt. Elder Thomas, a man whose eyes held the exhaustion of someone who had lived far too long, finally spoke. The transformation occurs differently for everyone. Some retain their youthful appearance indefinitely. Others, he gestured to his own weathered face. We age slowly, but we age nonetheless. Transformation? Sarah's voice cracked. What transformation? Matthias rose from his chair, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body remembered pain, even if it no longer experienced it fully. You stumbled upon us, Miss Chen, but your arrival was not entirely coincidental. This place calls to certain bloodlines, certain families. The room tilted slightly, and Sarah gripped the back of a chair for support. My family? What do you know about my family? Your grandmother, Catherine said softly. Eleanor Chen. She came here in 1943, much as you have now, pregnant, alone, seeking shelter from a world that had grown too dangerous. Sarah's breath caught. Her grandmother had died when Sarah was 12, but she had always been secretive about her past, deflecting questions about her youth with gentle smiles and changes of subject. That's impossible. My grandmother lived a full life. She aged normally. She died at 87. She left, Thomas said, his voice heavy with old regret, the only one who ever managed it, and only because she was willing to pay the price. What price? But even as Sarah asked, she felt a terrible certainty settling in her chest. Matthias returned to his seat, studying her with eyes that had witnessed too much. The binding that keeps us here, that grants us our extended lives, it requires an anchor. Usually, that anchor is our acceptance of this place as our eternal home. But Eleanor found another way, a temporary escape that would last only as long as her natural lifespan. She made a bargain, Catherine continued. Her bloodline would be forever connected to this place. She could leave, live a normal life, but eventually the debt would come due. The next generation, or the one after that, would be called back. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into the chair she'd been gripping. The nightmares, the dreams of this place. I've been having them for months. The calling, several council members said in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony. Your child, Matthias said gently, though his words carried the impact of a physical blow, carries that same bloodline, that same connection. It's why you were drawn here now, while the bond between you and the child is strongest. The baby moved again, and Sarah wondered if it could somehow sense the conversation, the terrible weight of inherited destiny settling around them both. And if I refuse, if I try to leave? The forest won't let you, Thomas said simply. We've tried to help others escape over the decades. The paths shift, the trees move, time itself becomes fluid. Eleanor's departure weakened something fundamental about this place's barriers. No one has been able to leave since. Sarah felt tears she hadn't realized were falling streak down her cheeks. So I'm trapped here forever? My child will never know the outside world? There are worse fates, Catherine offered, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe it herself. Here, you'll never know hunger, disease, or the ravages of time as others do. Your child will be safe, protected, but never free, Sarah whispered. The council fell silent, and in that silence, Sarah heard the weight of their collective imprisonment. They had made their peace with it, these ageless guardians of a secret that had claimed her family's future before she was even born. But she was not ready to surrender, not for herself, and certainly not for the innocent life growing within her. Outside the chamber, wind rattled the ancient shutters, and somewhere in the distance she could swear she heard children laughing or screaming. In this place, Sarah was beginning to realize the difference might be meaningless. The ancient journal's pages crackled beneath Sarah's fingertips as she read by candlelight in her small room. The handwriting was faded but legible, chronicling the arrival of someone called the first bearer over a century ago. Her heart hammered as she recognized descriptions that could only match her own experience. A pregnant woman, lost and desperate, finding sanctuary in this impossible place. The child born to Eleanor Blackwood possessed the gift immediately. One entry read, "Unlike the others who required the ritual, young Margaret emerged already touched by the eternal blessing. She became our most precious guardian, ensuring the village's continuation through her unique connection to the source." Sarah's blood ran cold. Margaret, the elderly woman who had welcomed her so warmly, was over 100 years old, born here to another pregnant stranger who had arrived just as Sarah had. The baby kicked urgently against her ribs, as if sensing her growing terror. A soft knock interrupted her reading. "Sarah, dear." Margaret's voice drifted through the wooden door. "May I come in? I've brought some tea." With trembling hands, Sarah slipped the journal beneath her pillow and called out for Margaret to enter. The woman appeared with her familiar kind smile, carrying a steaming cup that smelled of herbs Sarah couldn't identify. "You look pale, child. Are you feeling well?" Margaret settled into the wooden chair beside the bed, her eyes bright and alert despite the late hour. "Just tired," Sarah managed, accepting the warm cup. The liquid was bitter, with an underlying sweetness that coated her tongue strangely. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you lived here?" Margaret's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Oh, time moves differently in Elderwood. Some days feel like years, others pass in the blink of an eye." Sarah took another sip of the tea, noting how Margaret hadn't really answered her question. The room felt warmer suddenly, and a drowsy contentment began spreading through her limbs. The other villagers seemed so devoted to the children. As they should be. The children are our future, our hope. They carry something precious that must be protected. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Just as your child will." The cup slipped from Sarah's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the wooden floor. The drowsiness that had been creeping over her transformed into sharp alarm as she realized what was happening. "What did you put in that tea?" Margaret's expression remained serene. "Nothing that will harm you, dear one, simply something to help you rest. You've been reading things that might disturb your sleep." Sarah tried to stand, but found her legs unsteady. Margaret rose smoothly and retrieved the journal from beneath the pillow with practiced ease. "This old thing?" I wondered where it had gone. Eleanor was quite the chronicler, though she never understood the true beauty of what we preserve here. "What happened to her?" Sarah's words came out slurred despite her efforts to stay alert. "She fought us, I'm afraid. Tried to leave when Margaret was still an infant. Such a tragedy." The elderly woman, who wasn't elderly at all, Sarah realized with growing horror, tucked the journal under her arm, but her daughter understood eventually. "I've had many years to learn from Eleanor's mistakes." The room tilted dangerously as Sarah gripped the bedpost for support. "You're not really her daughter. You were the pregnant woman. You're Eleanor." A laugh like silver bells filled the air. "Oh, my dear, how delightfully close you are." Eleanor was indeed the first, but she proved inadequate to our needs. "I am Margaret, born of her body but not bound by her weakness. And now I help guide new bearers, as I was guided." Sarah's vision blurred, but she forced herself to focus. "Bearers of what?" "Life, eternal, of course. Your child will be born here, raised here, and one day help us welcome the next bearer who stumbles into our care. It's a beautiful cycle, really, each generation stronger than the last." The drug in the tea was winning, pulling Sarah toward unconsciousness even as she fought to stay awake. "I won't let you. My baby won't be part of this." Margaret's hand was cool against Sarah's fevered forehead as she helped her back onto the bed. "Rest now, dear one. Tomorrow you'll meet the true guardians of our village. They're so eager to explain everything properly. And don't worry about escape. The paths only lead deeper into our protection now that you've accepted our hospitality." As darkness claimed her, Sarah's last coherent thought was of the journal's final entry she glimpsed. Before Margaret's arrival, the bearer's child must never reach the stone circle. It is there the binding becomes permanent, and all hope of return to the outer world dies forever. Her hand fell protectively across her swollen belly as consciousness faded, Margaret's humming echoing in the small room like a lullaby that had been sung for far too many years. The morning brought no comfort, only the harsh reality of Elena's situation crystallizing like frost on the cottage windows. She had spent the night cataloguing every detail of the journal, cross-referencing dates and names with her fragmented memories. The pattern that emerged chilled her more than the mountain air ever could. Sarah entered without knocking, carrying a tray of warm bread and honey. Her eternally youthful face wore an expression of practiced sympathy that Elena was beginning to recognize as another layer of the village's elaborate performance. "You look tired," Sarah observed, setting the tray on the small wooden table. "The dreams can be difficult at first." "What dreams?" Elena's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been unusually active during the night. "The ones where you remember." Sarah's voice carried a weight that seemed impossible for someone who appeared to be barely 16. "They always start around the third day." Elena felt the walls of the cottage pressing closer. "How long have you really been here, Sarah?" A flicker of something, pain perhaps or longing, crossed the girl's features before the practiced serenity returned. "Time moves differently here. You'll understand soon enough." "I don't want to understand. I want to leave." Sarah's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, beautiful and hollow. "We all wanted to leave once. Even Miriam, though she'd never admit it now." Through the window, Elena could see children playing in the village square, their laughter carrying on the morning air. The same children she'd seen yesterday, engaged in identical games with identical enthusiasm. The realization struck her like a physical blow. It wasn't just their appearance that never changed, but their actions, their routines, everything about them locked in an endless loop. "The ritual," Elena said, the words scraping against her throat. "It's not just about staying young, is it?" Sarah's composure cracked, revealing something ancient and weary beneath the youthful facade. "The children, they need anchoring. Without new blood, new life to draw from, they begin to fade. We tried to break the cycle once, years ago. 3 children simply disappeared. Not dead, not gone, just less. Until there was nothing left but the memory of laughter." Elena's baby kicked hard, as if responding to the conversation. She pressed both hands to her stomach, a fierce protectiveness surging through her. "You're talking about my child." "I'm talking about survival," Sarah replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "The village has protected itself for generations. We're not monsters, Elena. We're just people who made an impossible choice when faced with an impossible situation." "What situation?" Sarah moved to the window, gazing out at the playing children with an expression of profound sadness. "The plague came to the mountain in 1847. Not the kind that kills the body. This was something else, something that aged people rapidly, grotesquely. Children became elderly in days. Adults crumbled to dust within hours of showing symptoms." Elena remembered her grandmother's stories about strange illnesses that swept through remote communities, tales dismissed as folklore. "But you found a way to stop it." Miriam's ancestor found a way to reverse it. "The ritual draws life force, yes, but it also creates a barrier against the plague. As long as the children remain as they are, the sickness cannot return." "At what cost?" Sarah turned back to Elena, and for a moment her youthful mask slipped entirely. Elena saw the exhaustion of someone who had lived far too long, who had watched countless seasons pass while trapped in an unchanging form. "Everything," Sarah whispered. "We gave up everything." The cottage door opened abruptly, and Miriam entered without invitation. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, the journal open on Elena's lap, Sarah's stricken expression, the palpable tension in the small space. "Enough," Miriam said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Sarah, you forget yourself. She has a right to know, Sarah protested, but she was already shrinking back into her practiced role. Miriam's gaze fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Rights are a luxury we surrendered long ago. There are only responsibilities now. Elena stood, clutching the journal to her chest. I won't let you use my child for your ritual. You speak as if you have a choice in the matter. Miriam stepped closer, and Elena noticed for the first time the strange quality of the woman's shadow. It seemed to move independently, reaching toward Elena with grasping fingers. The ritual isn't something we perform on you, dear. It's something that happens whether we will it or not. The village itself calls to new life, draws it in, transforms it. Elena felt a sudden, overwhelming dizziness. The cottage walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, and she could swear she heard whispers coming from the very stones around her. The process has already begun, Miriam continued, her smile sharp as broken glass. Your child belongs to us now. The photograph slipped from Elena's trembling fingers, floating to the dusty floor like a dying leaf. Her knees buckled as she stared at the impossible image, herself unmistakably standing beside a weathered cottage with ivy crawling up its walls. But this wasn't recent. The sepia tones, the formal poses, the Victorian clothing draped over her familiar frame all screamed of a time that should have been decades before her birth. You remember now, don't you? Miriam's voice drifted from the doorway, soft as spider silk. Elena couldn't speak. Her hands instinctively moved to her swollen belly as fragments of memory began to surface. Not memories of her current life, but something deeper, older. The taste of bitter herbs on her tongue, the feeling of rough wool against her skin, the sound of children's laughter that never changed, never grew older. How is this possible? The words scraped from her throat. Miriam stepped into the attic, her ageless face wearing an expression of infinite sadness. Time moves differently here, child. It always has. Some of us are bound to this place in ways that transcend a single lifetime. The baby kicked violently, as if responding to the revelation. Elena gasped, doubling over as a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. No, this isn't real. I'm Elena Marsh. I'm 28 years old. I've never been here before. Haven't you? Miriam approached slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden planks. Close your eyes. Feel the village calling to you. Feel how the very stones know your touch. Despite her terror, Elena found herself obeying. The moment her eyelids fell shut, the memories crashed over her like a tide. She was standing in the village square, but it was different, newer somehow, with fewer of the twisted children wandering the paths. She was arguing with someone, a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands. I won't let you do this to our child, her voice echoed across the decades. There has to be another way. The covenant cannot be broken, the man replied, his face etched with anguish. The village must survive. Our sacrifice ensures that. Elena's eyes snapped open. Thomas. The name escaped her lips unbidden. Miriam nodded solemnly. Your husband, in that life anyway. He was the village elder then, tasked with maintaining the old ways. You were resistant. The pieces clicked together with nauseating clarity. I was pregnant then too. Yes. And you tried to leave, just as you're trying to leave now. But the village called you back, as it always does, as it always will. Elena backed away until she hit the attic wall, her breath coming in short gasps. What happened to my baby? To Thomas? You delivered a beautiful daughter. Miriam's smile was cruel in its gentleness. She's still here, of course, still 8 years old, still playing in the meadows with the others. You've seen her, haven't you? The little girl with your eyes? The room spun around Elena. She thought of the child who had watched her so intently from across the square, the one who seemed to recognize her, her daughter. Trapped forever as a child, never aging, never growing, never becoming the woman she was meant to be. And Thomas? Time claimed him eventually. He wasn't one of the chosen. Only the children remain eternal, and those women bound to bear them. Miriam's eyes glittered. That's why you've returned, Elena. Your soul is tied to this place, destined to birth child after child to feed the covenant. I'll kill myself first." The words came out harder than Elena intended, but she meant them. "You tried that before, too." Miriam gestured to the scattered photographs. "Look again." With shaking hands, Elena picked up another image. It showed her lifeless body laid out on a stone altar, belly still swollen with child. Standing around her were the villagers, their faces solemn but not surprised. "3 days you lay dead," Miriam continued conversationally. "Then the village brought you back, as it always does. You gave birth a week later." The cycle continued. Elena's legs gave out completely and she slumped against the wall. The magnitude of her prison was becoming clear, not just trapped in this village, but trapped in an eternal cycle of birth and death and rebirth. Her child would join the others, forever young, forever lost, and she would eventually die and return, only to do it all again. "How many times?" she whispered. "Does it matter? 6, 7. You never remember at first, but the village is patient. It always helps you remember when the time is right." The baby kicked again, and Elena felt a new emotion rising alongside her terror, a fierce, protective rage that seemed to burn away the confusion. She looked up at Miriam with eyes that held centuries of accumulated fury. "This time will be different." Miriam's smile faltered slightly. "They all say that." But Elena was already moving, her hand closing around a sharp piece of broken pottery from the floor. If she was truly bound to this nightmare, she would find a way to break the chains. Her daughters deserved freedom, even if Elena had to tear the village apart to give it to them. The photograph trembled in Elena's hands as she stared at her own face looking back at her, a face that belonged to a woman who should have died decades before Elena was born. The sepia-toned image showed a group of villagers standing in the very square where she now stood, and there, unmistakably, was herself. Same dark hair, same angular cheekbones, same scar above her left eyebrow that she'd gotten falling from a tree when she was 7. "Impossible," she whispered. But even as the word left her lips, fragments of memory began surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. A lullaby sung in a voice she recognized as Mira's. The taste of honey cakes that she somehow knew came from the bakery's old stone ovens, the feeling of smooth river rocks beneath her bare feet, though she'd never walked that path before arriving here. Mrs. Crane appeared beside her, moving with that unsettling silence all the villagers seemed to possess. "You're beginning to remember, aren't you, dear?" Elena's breath came in sharp gasps. "This isn't possible. I was born in Seattle. I have birth certificates, medical records." "Do you?" Mrs. Crane's weathered hand touched Elena's shoulder. "Or do you have the carefully constructed life that was built for you when you left?" The baby kicked hard against Elena's ribs, as if responding to her mounting panic. She pressed her hand to her belly, trying to ground herself in the present moment, but the memories were coming faster now, running through these same streets as a child, hiding in the bell tower during some kind of ceremony, and always, the overwhelming need to escape. "I left before," Elena said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "I was one of the children here, and I got away." Mrs. Crane nodded slowly. "You were 17 when you found the path during the autumn mist. We searched for months, but you'd vanished completely. We thought you were lost forever." Her eyes grew distant. "But the village always calls its children home." Elena's mind raced through the implications. If she'd lived here as a child, if she'd escaped only to be drawn back while pregnant, then the baby. What happens to the children born here? Why do they never age? "Come," Mrs. Crane said, guiding Elena toward the old church at the village's heart. "It's time you learned the full truth." The church's interior was far older than its exterior suggested. Ancient symbols were carved into stone walls that predated any Christian influence, and the air hummed with an energy that made Elena's skin crawl. Below the altar, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. "The village exists in a fold between worlds," Mrs. Crane explained as they walked down the stone steps. "A place where time moves differently, where certain agreements can be honored." The staircase opened into a vast underground chamber lit by phosphorescent moss that grew in intricate patterns across the walls. At the center stood a pool of water so dark it seemed to absorb light. Around its edges, Elena could see small bundles wrapped in white cloth. Every generation, one child must be given to maintain the balance, Mrs. Crane continued. In exchange, the others remain forever young, forever protected from the world's cruelties. The child doesn't die, Elena. They transform, becoming part of something greater. Elena backed toward the stairs, but found her path blocked by other villagers who had silently followed them down. Marcus stood among them, his boyish face grave with ancient sadness. "I was meant to be the offering 60 years ago," he said quietly. "But my mother couldn't bear to give me up. She chose to offer herself instead, and I've been trapped between states ever since, unable to age, unable to transform, unable to leave. And now?" Elena's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Now you've returned with the next generation," Mrs. Crane said. "Your child will complete the cycle that's been waiting all these years." Elena felt the walls closing in around her, both literally and figuratively. The villagers stepped closer, their expressions mixing sympathy with inexorable determination. She thought of David, probably frantically searching for her in a world that suddenly felt impossibly far away. She thought of the life growing inside her, innocent of the fate being planned for it. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. Mira emerged from the shadows, looking exactly as she had in Elena's recovered memories. "There is, child. The same way you took before." She gestured to a narrow crack in the chamber's far wall, barely visible in the dim light. "But this time you understand the cost. If you leave, the village dies. Everyone here, all the children you've come to care for, will age and crumble to dust in moments." Elena stared at the crack in the wall, then at the faces surrounding her. Some she recognized from her childhood memories, others from her days since arriving, all watching her with the weight of centuries in their eyes, waiting for her to choose between her child's freedom and their eternal existence. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if urging her toward a decision that would determine both their fates. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the ritual chamber, watching through a crack in the ancient masonry. The village children stood in a perfect circle around Elena, their eternal youth now appearing grotesque in the flickering candlelight. Their eyes held centuries of accumulated knowledge and malice that no child should possess. Elena knelt in the center, her weathered hands tracing symbols in the dirt floor. The markings glowed with an otherworldly light that made Sarah's skin crawl. She recognized some of the symbols from the journal fragments she'd found, the same ones that had been carved into her mother's gravestone, the ones that had haunted her dreams since childhood. "The bloodline returns," Elena chanted, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate from the very walls. "As foretold by the first mothers, the daughter of Margaret Thorne comes back to us, carrying the next vessel." Sarah's breath caught. Her mother's name, spoken with such reverence and hatred, confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Her mother hadn't simply escaped this place. She'd been part of it, part of whatever unholy covenant bound these people to their ageless existence. Thomas stepped forward from the shadows, his boyish face twisted with anticipation. "The ritual moon rises. Soon we can complete what was started 32 years ago." "My mother fought you," Sarah whispered, though she knew they couldn't hear her from her hiding place. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Her mother's sudden departure from her hometown, the way she'd always refused to speak of her past, the protective wards Sarah had found hidden throughout their old house. Margaret Thorne had been running from this place her entire adult life. Elena rose slowly, bones creaking audibly in the silence. Margaret was foolish to think she could break the covenant. She bore the mark, as does her daughter. The child within Sarah carries 3 generations of our essence. When it's born here, under our protection, it will be the most powerful guardian we've ever created. The children, if they could still be called that, began to hum in unison, a sound that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's bones and make her unborn baby shift restlessly. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the frantic movements within. Even in the womb, her child could sense the wrongness of this place. Marcus emerged from another tunnel entrance, his face grim but determined. Sarah had suspected he might be different from the others, but seeing him now in the ritual chamber, she realized he was actively working against them. "The barriers are weakening," he reported to Elena, though Sarah caught the subtle way his eyes scanned the room, as if searching for something. "The outside world grows suspicious of our isolation." Elena nodded, seemingly pleased. "All the more reason to complete the binding tonight. With Sarah's child anchoring us to the mortal realm, we can maintain our sanctuary for another century." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. They weren't just planning to trap her baby in this ageless nightmare. They intended to use it as some kind of spiritual anchor, a way to maintain their unnatural existence, while hiding from the modern world that would destroy them if it knew the truth. The humming grew louder, more insistent. Through the crack in the wall, Sarah watched in horror as the circle of children began to change. Their young faces flickered like candle flames, revealing glimpses of their true ages. Wrinkled skin, hollow eyes, the accumulated weight of decades or centuries of stolen time. They were aging and returning to their child forms in rapid succession, as if the ritual was causing their carefully maintained appearances to destabilize. "Bring her," Elena commanded, and Sarah's heart stopped. She pressed herself further back into the shadows, but it was too late. Two of the older village women appeared at either end of her hiding passage, moving with purpose and certainty. They had known where she was all along. "Don't resist," one of them said gently, almost maternally. "It will be easier for the baby if you cooperate." Sarah's mind raced as they escorted her toward the ritual chamber. The journal pages she'd studied mentioned something about the lunar cycle, about specific conditions required for the covenant rituals. If she could delay them, find a way to disrupt their carefully planned ceremony, she might still have a chance. As they pushed her into the circle of light, Elena smiled with genuine warmth that somehow made everything worse. "Welcome home, Sarah. Your mother tried so hard to keep you from us, but blood calls to blood. You belong here as she did, as your child will." The children closed ranks around her, their shifting faces a nightmare of innocence and ancient evil. Sarah felt the symbols carved into the floor beginning to pulse beneath her feet, responding to her presence with an energy that made her skin burn. Her baby kicked frantically as if trying to escape what was coming. Elena raised her arms toward the opening in the chamber's ceiling, where moonlight streamed down like a silver blade. "Let us begin." The basement beneath the clinic stretched far deeper than Maya had imagined, carved directly into the living rock of the cliff face. Dr. Thorne's flashlight beam danced across rough stone walls as they descended the narrow staircase, each step echoing in the suffocating darkness below. "The records you seek are here," Thorne whispered, his voice carrying an odd reverence. "But I warn you, some knowledge carries a price that can never be repaid." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had grown unnaturally still since her encounter with the book. The silence from within her womb felt ominous, as if her child was holding its breath, waiting. "I'm already paying a price. I need to understand why." The basement opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with metal filing cabinets that disappeared into the shadows beyond their meager light. But it was the center of the room that made Maya's blood freeze. A circular table dominated the space, its surface stained dark with what could only be blood. Restraints hung from its edges like sleeping serpents. "The covenant requires sacrifice," Thorne said, noticing her horrified stare. "Not death, you understand. Something far more precious, the essence of growth, of change, of time itself." He moved to one of the filing cabinets and withdrew a thick folder. The label read Blackwood E., initial binding, 1943. Maya's maiden name blazed across the tab like an accusation. "Your grandmother," Thorne explained, setting the folder on a clean section of the table. "She came to us much as you have, pregnant, desperate, seeking refuge from a world at war. We offered her sanctuary, and she accepted our terms. Maya opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first document was a birth certificate for Elena Blackwood, dated 3 days before Maya's grandmother supposedly died in childbirth according to family records. But here was proof that Elena had lived, that she had given birth in this very village. The binding ceremony, Thorne continued, requires 3 components: the willing sacrifice of a bloodline's future, the essence of unborn potential, and the anchor of innocent blood. His finger traced a diagram in the file showing a pregnant woman strapped to the table. Your grandmother provided the first 2 willingly, believing she was saving her child from the horrors of war. And the third component? Maya's voice barely rose above a whisper. The files contained photograph after photograph of the procedure. Maya recognized some of the children from the village: Thomas, Sarah, little Marcus, their faces unchanged across decades of images. In each photo they lay pale and still on the table, while robed figures drew blood from their small forms. They feel everything, Thorne said quietly. The pain, the fear, the gradual erosion of their souls. But they cannot age, cannot die, cannot escape. They exist only to feed the ritual that your grandmother's sacrifice began. Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair beside the table. But she left the village. My mother was born outside, raised in the normal world. The binding follows the bloodline, Thorne replied, producing another file. Your mother bore the mark, though she never understood its significance. Every strange occurrence in her life, every unexplained illness or accident, the covenant calling its due. And now, through you, the debt comes full circle. He opened the second file to reveal medical records spanning decades. Maya's mother's mysterious childhood illnesses, her struggle with infertility before Maya's birth, her early death from a cancer that baffled doctors, all of it connected by an invisible thread to this place. Your child is the key to completing what your grandmother began, Thorne said. Born of the bloodline, conceived in innocence, carrying the potential for infinite renewal, the covenant has been waiting 78 years for this moment. Maya's hands pressed against her belly, feeling for any sign of movement. What happens to my baby? The child will become the new anchor. Its life force will bind the village for another generation, perhaps longer. The current children will finally be released to whatever comes after this half-existence, and new ones will take their place. Thorne's eyes gleamed in the flashlight beam. It is not death we offer your child, but eternal purpose. The baby suddenly kicked, hard enough to make Maya gasp. In that moment of movement she felt something else, a warmth spreading through her chest, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in the darkness. Fight. Maya stood slowly, her resolve crystallizing like ice in her veins. She now understood the true nature of her prison, the source of the village's terrible power, and the fate awaiting her unborn child. But knowledge, she realized, could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. Show me everything, she said to Thorne. I want to understand exactly how the covenant works. The basement of the cottage stretched deeper than Sarah had imagined, carved directly into the cliff face itself. Ancient stone steps descended into darkness, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of salt and something else, something organic and wrong. Elena's lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, revealing symbols etched into the stone. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. Sarah's hand pressed against her belly as the baby stirred restlessly, as if sensing the wrongness of this place. The records go back to the founding, Elena whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow passage. But the real truth goes much deeper. They emerged into a circular chamber, its domed ceiling disappearing into shadow above. Shelves carved into the walls held dozens of leather-bound books, scrolls, and objects Sarah couldn't identify in the dim light. But it was the center of the room that made her blood freeze. A stone altar, its surface stained dark with centuries of use. Around its base, smaller stones arranged in precise patterns, each one bearing the carved image of a child's face. Some she recognized: Thomas, little Mercy, others from the village. But there were hundreds more, stretching back in time, the older carvings worn almost smooth. Every child who came to the village, Elena said, setting the lantern on a shelf. Every child who was chosen. Sarah backed toward the steps, but Elena moved to block her path. The older woman's face had changed, the mask of kindness falling away to reveal something cold and ancient beneath. You can't run anymore, Sarah. You never could. The moment you set foot in this place, the moment you felt that pull. Elena smiled, and in the lantern light, her teeth looked sharp. You were always meant to come home. This isn't my home, Sarah said, but even as the words left her lips, she felt their hollowness. The symbols on the walls seemed familiar, like a language she'd once known but forgotten. The baby kicked harder, as if trying to escape. Elena moved to one of the shelves and withdrew a slim journal bound in dark leather. Your grandmother kept records. Every woman who carried the bloodline, every child born to continue our covenant. She opened the book and Sarah glimpsed page after page of names, dates, bloodlines traced back generations. Elena's finger traced down one column until she found what she was looking for. Margaret Whitmore. Fled the village in 1962, pregnant with your mother. We thought the line was lost. Elena looked up, her eyes gleaming in the lantern light. But bloodlines have a way of calling their children home. The chamber seemed to spin around Sarah. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, who had never spoken of her past, who had filled Sarah's childhood with strange stories and stranger dreams. She tried to keep you away, Elena continued, moved inland, away from the sea, away from places of power. But she couldn't change what you are, what your child will be. What are you talking about? Sarah's voice cracked. Elena moved to the altar, running her hand over its stained surface. The village has survived for over 300 years because of the covenant. The children never age because they feed on something eternal. Life force, youth, the promise of tomorrow. Her smile widened. And what holds more promise than an unborn child? The baby's movements became frantic, and Sarah felt a sharp pain in her side. She pressed against the wall, seeking support, and her hand brushed against one of the carved symbols. The moment her skin made contact, the world exploded into vision. She saw the village as it truly was, not the quaint cottages and smiling faces, but something ancient and hungry. The children weren't children at all, but creatures wearing the shapes of youth, their true forms writhing masses of shadow and need. She saw the rituals, the offerings, the pregnant women brought to this very chamber over the centuries, and she saw her grandmother, young and terrified, standing exactly where Sarah stood now. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Sarah gasping. Elena watched her with satisfaction. Now you begin to understand. Your grandmother was stronger than most. She managed to escape during the ritual itself, but escape was never permanent. The bloodline always calls us back. Sarah's mind raced. The dreams that had plagued her pregnancy, the irresistible pull toward this place, the way her unborn child seemed to react to the village's presence. All of it connected to a heritage she'd never known she carried. The ritual happens at dawn, Elena said, closing the journal. When the tide is highest and the boundary between worlds grows thin, your child will join the others, and in exchange, the village will survive another generation. Oh no. Sarah's voice was stronger now, fueled by protective fury. I won't let you. Elena laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls like breaking glass. You think you have a choice? The covenant is written in your blood, child, in your baby's blood. Dawn comes whether you will it or not. The ancient tome felt heavy in Elena's trembling hands, its leather binding worn smooth by countless fingers across centuries. The village library had been abandoned for hours, leaving her alone with the weight of terrible knowledge. Page after page revealed the systematic horror that had consumed Millbrook for over 300 years. The covenant of eternal youth, as the founders had called it, required a specific sacrifice every generation. Not just any child would suffice. It had to be one born of the village bloodline, someone whose essence could feed the collective immortality that bound the residents to this cursed place. The children who never aged weren't blessed. They were vessels, their growth stunted to preserve the adults who had made this unholy bargain. Elena's breath caught as she found her own family name etched in faded ink. The Morrison line stretched back to the village's founding, each generation marked with careful notations. Her grandmother's name appeared with a red star beside it, escaped 1952. Below that, her mother's birth year, and beside it, the word lost. The baby kicked violently, as if sensing her distress. Elena pressed her hand to her belly, understanding now why she'd been drawn to this place, why the residents had welcomed her so readily despite their usual isolation. She wasn't a stranger seeking shelter. She was the missing piece of their grotesque puzzle, returned home to fulfill her bloodline's obligation. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Elena quickly closed the tome and slipped it beneath a pile of mundane village records. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her ageless face wearing an expression of maternal concern that now seemed utterly sinister. "There you are, dear. You missed dinner." Margaret's eyes swept the scattered papers on Elena's desk. "Still researching our little community's history? Just curious about the founding families." Elena forced her voice to remain steady. "It's fascinating how some bloodlines have persisted here for so long." "Oh yes, the old families are the heart of Millbrook." Margaret moved closer, her smile never wavering. "We take great pride in our heritage. Some might say we're bound to it." She placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder, but her grip felt like iron. "Speaking of which, Dr. Harwick would like to see you first thing tomorrow. Just a routine check on the baby's progress." Elena's blood turned to ice. Dr. Harwick had been increasingly insistent about examining her, claiming concern about the pregnancy's advancement. Now she understood his true interest. He was monitoring when the child would be ready for their ritual. "Of course," Elena managed. "I should probably get some rest then." "Excellent idea." Margaret's fingers tightened momentarily before releasing. "Sweet dreams, dear." Alone again, Elena waited until Margaret's footsteps faded before retrieving the tome. She flipped to the final entries, desperate to understand the ritual's timing. The ceremonies always occurred during the new moon, when darkness was complete. Her heart sank as she realized the next new moon was only 3 days away. But there had to be a way out. Her grandmother had escaped. The red star proved it. Elena searched frantically through the pages until she found a loose sheet tucked between the back pages. Written in her grandmother's familiar handwriting were the words, "The binding can be broken, but only from within. The heart of their power lies beneath the oldest tree. When the moon dies, they are most vulnerable. Trust the children, they remember everything." Elena's mind raced. The oldest tree had to be the massive oak in the village center, the one where she'd first seen the unnaturally young children playing. If the ritual's power source lay buried there, perhaps she could disrupt it. But what did her grandmother mean about the children remembering? A soft tapping at the library window made her jump. One of the eternal children, a girl who appeared to be about 8, but whose eyes held decades of knowledge, pressed her face against the glass. When Elena approached, the girl mouthed a single word: "Tonight." Understanding flooded through Elena. The children weren't willing participants in this nightmare. They were prisoners like herself, trapped in bodies that would never grow while their minds continued to age. They knew the truth, had been waiting for someone who could act on their behalf. Elena gathered the tome and her grandmother's note, hiding them beneath her coat. As she prepared to leave the library, she caught her reflection in the dark window. For a moment she could swear she saw her grandmother's face looking back at her, the same determined expression that had once given her the strength to flee this place. The baby moved again, but this time it felt different. Not panicked kicks, but something almost like communication. Elena placed both hands on her belly and whispered, "We're going to get out of here. I promise." Outside, the children were gathering in the shadows, their young faces grave with ancient purpose. The final confrontation was beginning, and Elena was no longer alone in her fight against the village's centuries-old evil. The ancient chamber beneath the village pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. Stone walls carved with symbols she somehow understood told the story of a bargain struck centuries ago. Children's souls traded for immortality, their essence feeding the darkness that had claimed this place. But it was the final carving that stopped her cold, a woman with her exact face, holding a child that glowed with pure light. "You remember now, don't you?" Mother Constance's voice echoed from the tunnel behind her. Sarah spun around to find the village elder descending the crude steps, her eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. "You've seen the prophecy." "That's not me," Sarah whispered, though her hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly where the baby kicked with unusual strength. "It can't be. Your grandmother stood in this very chamber 90 years ago. She bore the mark, just as you do." Constance gestured to the birthmark on Sarah's wrist, the same mark she'd noticed on several villagers, though she'd convinced herself it was coincidence. She was supposed to stay to fulfill the covenant, but she ran. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her grandmother's journals, the ones her mother had hidden away, the stories of a village that shouldn't exist, of time standing still, of a choice that would echo through generations. She escaped. Temporarily. Constance moved closer, and Sarah could see the true age behind her youthful face, centuries of accumulated hunger and desperation. But the bargain was already struck. Every generation, a woman from your bloodline must return. The debt must be paid. Sarah backed against the carved wall, feeling the stone warm beneath her touch. What debt? What did she agree to? Your ancestor was dying in childbirth when she found us. The entity that protects this village, that feeds on innocence itself, offered her a choice, her child's life for a promise, that one day her descendant would return to complete what she started. You're insane. But even as Sarah said it, she felt the truth resonating in her bones, the strange dreams she'd had throughout her pregnancy, the inexplicable pull she'd felt toward this remote location, the way her car had broken down exactly where the mountain path began. The children here aren't trapped, Sarah. They're cultivated. Their eternal youth feeds our protector, keeps it strong enough to maintain the barriers between worlds. But it requires renewal, requires fresh innocence. Constance's smile was maternal and terrible. Your child carries a bloodline touched by prophecy. Its essence would sustain us for another century. Sarah's baby kicked again, harder this time, and she gasped as a wave of protective fury swept through her. "You'll never touch my child." "You don't understand. The entity has been growing weaker. The children we have aren't enough anymore. Without your child's sacrifice, the barriers will fail. The darkness we've contained here will spill into your world, consuming everything." Constance's voice carried genuine fear now. This village isn't just our prison. It's humanity's protection. Above them, Sarah could hear footsteps and voices. The other villagers were gathering, probably preparing for whatever ritual they had planned. She pressed her hand against the carved prophecy, and suddenly the stone beneath her palm grew hot. "The markings," she breathed, studying them with new understanding. "They're not just predictions, they're instructions." Constance stepped back, wariness replacing confidence. "What do you mean?" Sarah traced the symbols with her finger, feeling power thrumming through the stone. The ancient language flowed through her mind as if she'd always known it. "My grandmother didn't just escape. She found another way. The woman in the prophecy isn't sacrificing her child, she's breaking the cycle. Impossible. The covenant cannot be broken." "No," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as understanding flooded through her. "But it can be redirected. The entity doesn't need children's souls. It needs a willing guardian, someone to channel its hunger into something else." The carved symbols began to glow beneath her touch, and Sarah felt her unborn child respond, its movements synchronizing with the pulsing light. She understood now why she'd been drawn here, why her dreams had been filled with visions of this place, not to sacrifice her child, but to save it, and everyone else. "You can't," Constance whispered, backing toward the tunnel. The ritual requires someone from my bloodline to choose." Sarah pressed both hands against the wall, feeling the ancient power recognizing her claim. "I choose to rewrite the rules." The glow spread from the carvings throughout the chamber, and above them Sarah heard the villagers' voices rise in alarm. Time was running out. She had to complete what her grandmother had started, had to find a way to break the cycle without unleashing the entity on the world. But first, she had to survive whatever the villagers would do to stop her. The ancient chamber beneath the village pulsed with otherworldly energy as Sarah pressed her hands against her swollen belly, feeling her baby kick frantically, as if sensing the malevolent force surrounding them. The truth she'd uncovered moments before still reeled through her mind. She wasn't just a random traveler who'd stumbled upon this cursed place. She was the key they'd been waiting for, the final piece in their century-old ritual. Elena stood at the center of the stone circle, no longer the kindly village elder who'd welcomed Sarah weeks ago. Her eyes blazed with an inhuman hunger as she raised the obsidian blade that had claimed so many before. "Your bloodline carries the original blessing, Sarah. Your ancestor was the one who first bound us to this place, and now you'll complete what she began." The eternally young children formed a ring around them, their faces twisted with an ancient malice that no child should possess. Among them, Sarah recognized the boy who'd first led her to the village, Marcus, who she now knew had been 12 years old for over 2 centuries. His smile was cold and calculating as he began the chant that would seal her fate. "You don't understand," Sarah gasped, backing toward the chamber's stone wall. "If you complete this ritual, you won't break free. You'll trap yourselves forever. The curse isn't your prison, it's what's keeping something far worse contained." Elena's laugh echoed off the ancient stones. "Pretty lies won't save you now. We've waited too long, sacrificed too much. Your child will give us what we need to finally escape this place and reclaim our lives in the world above." But Sarah had spent weeks studying the village's hidden history, deciphering the symbols carved into every building and pathway. The truth was more horrifying than mere immortality. "Look around you," she said, gesturing to the walls covered in protective sigils. "This entire village is a seal. You're not prisoners, you're guardians, whether you remember it or not." The chanting faltered slightly as doubt flickered across some faces. Sarah pressed her advantage, her voice growing stronger despite her terror. "My ancestor didn't curse you. She bound you here to keep something buried, something that feeds on life force and grows stronger with each passing year. The children who joined your village over the centuries, they weren't transformed, they were consumed." Elena's grip on the blade tightened. "Silence! We know what we are, what was done to us. The ritual will set us free." "The ritual will release what you've been containing," Sarah shot back. "Every volunteer who stayed, every traveler who never left, they weren't transformed into eternal children. They were fed to the things sleeping beneath us. Can't you feel it stirring? It knows its prison is about to be broken." As if responding to her words, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The children's chant grew more frantic, but now Sarah could hear the fear creeping into their voices. The temperature in the chamber plummeted, and frost began forming on the ancient stones. "She's lying," Elena snarled, but her confidence was wavering. "The elders taught us—" "The elders were slowly being corrupted," Sarah interrupted, each generation forgetting a little more of the truth, remembering only fragments of what they thought they knew. "But the real records are hidden in the crypt beneath the church. I found them. I know what's really buried here." A sound echoed from deep within the earth, something vast and ancient stirring to wakefulness. The protective symbols on the walls began to glow with a sickly light, pulsing faster, as if responding to an imminent threat. Marcus stepped forward, his child's face twisted with centuries of accumulated malice. "Even if what you say is true, we're tired of this existence. Let the world burn if it means we can finally rest." "But it won't let you rest," Sarah said desperately. "It will consume you first, just like all the others. You think you've maintained your consciousness all these years through your own will? You're already being slowly digested. The only reason any part of you remains is because the seal weakens your captor. Break it completely and you'll be gone in minutes." The trembling intensified, and hairline cracks appeared in the chamber's ceiling. Ancient dust rained down as something massive shifted in the depths below. Elena raised the blade higher, her face a mask of desperate determination. "I won't spend another century in this nightmare. If we must risk everything, so be it." Sarah felt her baby kick again, stronger this time, and suddenly she understood. Her child wasn't just reacting to the danger. It was responding to the same bloodline power that had created this place, the same force that could either damn them all or potentially strengthen the failing seal. As Elena brought the blade down toward Sarah's outstretched hands, Sarah made a choice that would determine not just her fate and her child's, but the fate of everyone who would face the horror sleeping beneath the village if it ever broke free. Sarah pressed her hands against her swollen belly as another contraction rippled through her body. The ancient chamber beneath the village pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its crystalline walls reflecting the ethereal light that had sustained this cursed place for centuries. The children, those eternal prisoners trapped in young bodies, stood in a protective circle around her, their eyes no longer vacant but burning with newfound hope. "The binding weakens," whispered Marcus, the boy who had been 10 years old for over 2 centuries. "Your child. It's breaking the cycle." Elder Thorn lay crumpled against the chamber wall, his mask finally removed to reveal a face ravaged by time and guilt. The other elders had fled when the crystal's power began to fracture, but Sarah knew they wouldn't get far. The village itself was collapsing as the supernatural force that had held it together for so long finally unraveled. "Tell me the truth," Sarah gasped between contractions. "Why me? Why was I brought here?" Thorn's ancient eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. "You were born here, child. 30 years ago when the last vessel was chosen. Your mother, she was like you, pregnant alone, drawn to this place by forces she couldn't understand." Sarah's memories crashed back in fragments. Flashes of a woman's face she'd never remembered. Lullabies sung in a voice that had haunted her dreams. She tried to escape. "She did escape," Thorn wheezed. "But not before the ritual had begun. You were marked, touched by the crystal's power while still in the womb. We thought we had lost our chance, but the binding, it called you home." Another contraction seized her, stronger this time. The crystal overhead pulsed in rhythm with her labor, its light flickering between brilliant white and deep crimson. The children pressed closer, their small hands reaching out to touch her shoulders, her arms, lending her their strength. "What happens to them when it breaks?" Sarah demanded, looking at the faces surrounding her, faces that had watched empires rise and fall while trapped in eternal childhood. "We don't know," admitted Marcus. "We've been prisoners for so long, we've forgotten what freedom feels like." The chamber shuddered as another section of the village above collapsed. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and Sarah could hear the screaming of the remaining adults as their immortality began to fail. Some had been here for decades, others for centuries. Without the crystal's power, time would finally claim them. Sarah's water broke, the warm fluid mixing with the mineral-rich soil beneath the crystal. The moment it touched the ground, veins of silver light raced outward from the spot, spreading across the chamber floor like liquid starlight. The crystal's pulse grew erratic, its sustained hum rising to a piercing wail. "It's working," breathed a girl named Elena, who had been 6 years old when the Spanish conquistadors first arrived in the New World. "The new life, it's too pure. The crystal can't corrupt it." Sarah screamed as another wave of pain crashed over her, but this time it felt different, cleansing. The darkness that had lingered at the edges of her vision since arriving in the village began to lift, replaced by a warm golden glow that seemed to emanate from within her. The children began to change. Marcus's face showed the first signs of aging, subtle lines around his eyes, a slight deepening of his voice. Elena's hair grew longer even as they watched, her small frame beginning to stretch upward. For the first time in centuries, time was touching them again. "Push, Sarah," urged Marcus, his voice crackling as his vocal cords finally began to mature. "Whatever's coming, it's our salvation." With a final, tremendous effort, Sarah bore down. The crystal above exploded in a shower of light and fragments, its power finally spent. In that moment of absolute release, her daughter entered the world, not with a cry, but with a sound like singing wind, like morning bells, like the first note of a song that had been waiting centuries to be heard. The baby's eyes opened immediately, regarding the world with an ancient wisdom that made Sarah's breath catch. But unlike the terrible agelessness of the village children, this was pure knowledge, untainted by darkness or supernatural corruption. Around them, the chamber continued its collapse, but Sarah felt no fear. The silver light emanating from her newborn daughter created a protective cocoon, shielding them from falling debris. One by one, the children who had been trapped for so long began to age rapidly, their bodies finally claiming the years that had been stolen from them. Some crumbled to dust within moments, those who had been here longest. Others aged gracefully into their true eras before passing peacefully away. A few, the most recent arrivals, aged to their proper years and remained alive, blinking in wonder at their restored mortality. As Sarah held her daughter close, she felt the village's pull finally release its grip on her soul. The path home lay open at last, lit by the pure light of new life conquering ancient darkness.